They sold her on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when dust hangs in the air like it's waiting to hear bad news before settling. The girl stood on a wooden crate in the middle of the livestock yard, her small hands folded tightly in front of her, fingers trembling though she tried to keep them still. A dirty strip of cloth was tied loosely around her eyes, not because she needed it, but because it made the buyers more comfortable to forget she was already blind. Her name was Eliza, though no one there bothered to ask. To them, she was a burden, a mistake, a mouth that couldn't work the fields or see the road ahead. The auctioneer cleared his throat and announced her the same way he'd announced a lame mule an hour earlier. Blind girl, no kin, no use for labor. $1 starts the bid. A few men laughed. One spat into the dirt. Another muttered that she wouldn't last winter anyway. Eliza heard every word. Blindness hadn't dulled her hearing, it sharpened it. She heard the cruelty in their voices, the way pity mixed with disgust, and she held her breath, remembering her mother's voice from years ago, telling her that silence could sometimes be armor. The gavel came down once, no bids. The auctioneer shrugged. $1, he said again, almost embarrassed. A hand lifted half-heartedly. Another man smirked and waved a finger. I'll take her for $1, just so she ain't cluttering. The yard. The gavel slammed. Sold. Just like that. For less than a loaf of bread. The man who bought her yanked her off the crate by the wrist. His grip rough, impatient. Eliza stumbled, nearly falling. But she caught herself. Though her knees shook so badly she thought she might collapse. As he dragged her away, she heard laughter behind her, coins clinking, boots scraping against dirt that had seen too much cruelty to care anymore. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears only made people crueler. Instead, she whispered a prayer under her breath, not for rescue, because hope hurt too much, but for strength to endure whatever came next. They didn't keep her long. The man who bought her had only wanted to prove a point, to show that even a blind girl had a price if the world was mean enough. By sunset, he was drunk and angry, cursing her because she moved too slowly, because she bumped into a chair, because her existence reminded him of something broken inside himself. He shoved her outside the saloon, threw her small bundle of belongings after her, and told her to get lost. Eliza sat on the ground, the cold seeping through her thin dress, listening to the swing doors slam, shut as laughter and music swallowed whatever dignity she had left. Night fell quickly. She didn't know where she was, didn't know which way led to safety or danger. All she knew was that she was alone again. She hugged her knees to her chest and rocked slightly, humming a tune her mother used to sing when the world felt too loud. She didn't hear the cowboy at first. His footsteps were different from the others, slower, heavier, like he was careful not to disturb the ground beneath him. When he stopped in front of her, she sensed him more than heard him, the way the air shifted when someone stood close. He didn't speak right away. That alone startled her. Most people filled silence with cruelty or questions she didn't want to answer. Finally, a calm, low voice said, "You're shivering." Eliza flinched, her hands tightening around her knees. I can move," she said quickly, fearing another shove, another curse. The man didn't raise his voice. "Didn't say you couldn't." There was a pause. "You got a place to go?" She shook her head before realizing he couldn't see it. "No, sir." Another pause. She braced herself. Instead of grabbing her, the cowboy knelt, the creak of leather and joints telling her he was older, worn by years under open sky. Slowly, deliberately, he held out his hand, not touching her, just close enough that she could feel its warmth. "Name's Caleb," he said. "You don't got to take my hand. But if you do, I'll make sure you don't fall." Eliza hesitated. Every instinct screamed that trusting strangers was how you got hurt, but there was something in his stillness. In the way he waited without pressure, that felt different. With shaking fingers, she reached out. When her hand met his, he closed his fingers gently, like he was holding something fragile, something worth protecting. In that moment, without knowing why, Eliza felt the faintest spark of something she hadn't felt in years: safety. Caleb didn't talk much as they walked. He guided her carefully, warning her of steps, stones, and narrow paths. When they reached his small cabin on the edge of town, he opened the door and stepped aside. "You're safe here tonight," he said simply. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee. He helped her sit, handed her a tin cup of warm broth, and then moved away, giving her space. No questions. No demands. Eliza drank slowly, savoring the warmth as it spread through her chest. She listened to the sounds of the cabin, the crackle of the fire, the wind outside, Caleb's boots as he moved around quietly. When exhaustion finally claimed her, she curled up on a small bed near the hearth. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "Thank you." Caleb's reply was barely louder than the fire. "Ain't nothing to thank me for." But as he sat awake through the night, watching the door, rifle within reach, he knew that wasn't true. Outside, the wind howled like the world protesting an act of kindness it hadn't approved. Inside, for the first time in a long while, a blind girl slept without fear. Morning came quietly to Caleb's cabin, the kind of quiet that felt earned rather than empty. Eliza woke to the smell of fresh coffee and something warm baking. Cornbread, she guessed by the faint sweetness in the air. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory rushed back. The auction yard, the dollar, the laughter, the cold ground outside the saloon, and then the hand, the steady, careful hand that had promised she wouldn't fall. She sat up slowly, listening. Caleb moved about the cabin with the same deliberate calm she remembered from the night before. He didn't startle when he noticed she was awake. "Morning," he said softly, like mornings were fragile things. He told her where the chair was, where the cup sat on the table, describing the space instead of touching her without permission. That alone told Eliza more about the man than 100 kind words ever could. Over breakfast, he finally asked what no one else ever had, what she wanted. The question stunned her. No one had asked her that since her mother died. She struggled to answer, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just don't want to be sold again." Caleb was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said something that settled into her bones like truth. "That ain't gonna happen. Not as long as you're with me." He offered her a place to stay, not as property, not as charity, but as someone who mattered. She could help in ways she could. Cooking, mending, keeping. The cabin a home instead of just a shelter. Eliza agreed, still half expecting the kindness to vanish like morning mist. But it didn't. Days turned into weeks. And Caleb's actions never contradicted his words. He taught her the layout of the land, walked her through the pasture so she could count steps and know where she was. He spoke to her like an equal. Even when townsfolk whispered that he was wasting his time on a blind girl worth less than $1, Eliza heard those whispers when they passed through town together. She felt the stares. But now, when cruelty brushed against her, it didn't sink in the same way. Caleb always walked just a half step beside her. Not leading, not pulling, just present. Trouble came the day the auctioneer rode out to the cabin with 2 men and a folded piece of paper. He claimed there had been a mistake, that the sale wasn't legal, that the girl still belonged to the county. Eliza felt the old fear claw its way back up her spine, her hands shaking as memories of the crate and the gavel threatened to swallow her whole. Before she could speak, Caleb stepped forward. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. He said the girl was under his protection now, and if anyone wanted to take her, they'd have to go through him. And the law he'd already spoken to in the next town over. The men laughed until Caleb placed his hand on his holster. Not threatening, just steady. Silence followed. The auctioneer muttered something about trouble not being worth it and turned his horse away. Eliza realized then that Caleb wasn't just a quiet man, he was a man who chose silence because his actions spoke louder. That night she cried for the first time in years, not from pain, but from relief. Caleb didn't tell her not to cry. He simply sat nearby, letting her know she wasn't alone in it. Seasons changed. Eliza learned the rhythm of the ranch, the way wind sounded different before rain, the way Caleb's footsteps told her his mood better than his words ever did. In return, she brought warmth to the cabin, laughter that surprised them both, and a strength born from surviving what should have broken her. Townsfolk slowly changed too. They saw the blind girl who cooked meals for neighbors in need, who listened without judgment, who knew people by their voices and treated them with a kindness they hadn't earned. They saw the cowboy who stood taller beside her than he ever had alone. When someone once joked that she'd been sold for $1, Caleb answered before Eliza could. Best dollar anyone ever spent, he said, not as a joke, but as fact. Years later, when Eliza stood on the porch of that same cabin, strong, confident, unafraid, she thought of the girl on the crate and wished she could tell her one thing. You are not your price. You never were. And somewhere out there, even in the cruelest world, there can be a hand that reaches out and means it.